Chaim.
Wait 1 second. Alright.
So,
We're back.
Willie King was 51 years old, and he had been suffering from diabetes for 20 years, and he had circulation problems in his leg, and became very serious, and it reached a point where the doctors decided that he had to have his right leg amputated. So on February, it means cut off. So on February 20th, 1995, he went into UCH, University Community Hospital, and next thing he remembers is waking up in the recovery room and the doctor approaching him and asking him how is his leg, and he looks down and he's in shock. He looks down, and instead of his right leg, they had removed his left leg. Of course, there's nothing they can do about it now. It's too late. You can't put the leg back on. And even though he got, both the hospital and the doctors had to pay large fines. There was a $900,000 and a $200,000 fines that were given. But there's nothing you could do to fix the mistake. And he would have to live the rest of his life without even one good leg. And this became one of the more notorious, well-known cases of what's known as wrong site surgery, WSS. It was picked up by all the media, it was shown everywhere. And over the next few years, people started to realize that this was a serious problem. This was far from the only case. It's just one of the most well-known cases. And over the next few years, different protocols were put into place to try to minimize or prevent it. In 1997, the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons promoted the Sign Your Site campaign, where they would put a mark on the person's body where the surgery had to take place. In July 2003, the Joint Commission released the Universal Protocol for preventing wrong site surgery, and the following year became mandatory for all accredited hospitals, any other place doing surgery. And the protocols include, first of all, marking off the site where the surgery is supposed to take place, marking off the site where the surgery is not supposed to take place to let you know not to touch that area. And also there's a whole checklist that the doctors have to go through before surgery to try to prevent this. However, despite all the protocols, unfortunately it still happens. According to the Joint Commission statistics, there were 68 wrong site surgeries in just the US in the year 2020. Wow. And those were voluntarily reported, and it's assumed that many cases are not reported. So the number might number in the hundreds or even thousands, possibly. And obviously, it's very important to, especially for a surgeon, but really for anybody, to keep track of the right side and the left side, and not to get mixed up between them. There are people who have trouble with it. 1 in about 6 people have actually a difficult time differentiating between the right and left sides. And in this week's Torah portion, we have a very interesting verse. The verse tells us that you have to follow the teachings of the sages, of the Chachamim. And it says, Al pi ha'torah asher yerucha v'al mishpat asher yomer lecha taseh lo yisasur min hadavar asher yigidu lecha yamin usmoil. You should not turn away from the words of the sages to go to the right or to the left. So what does Rashi say? Rashi says, what does it mean to go to the right or to the left? Even if the rabbis tell you that the right side is really the left side, you have to follow them. What does this mean? Even if they tell you the right side is the left side, how could you follow somebody like that? Right? And why do we choose right and left? What's specific about this idea? So, Kivi Bernard is a jeweler from Atlanta, and he's an international motivational speaker. He published a book, an internationally acclaimed book known as Leopardology, The Hunt for Profit in a Tough Global Economy. He's a frequent popular speaker for large corporate events, and he's also a religious Jew. A few years ago, Microsoft invited him to present a keynote address at one of their senior conferences. This was one of the most important conferences where senior executives from all over the world were to gather. And part of the focus of this conference were some of the theories that Kivi Bernard presented in his book, Business Theories. When they called him to ask him to speak, and they gave him the date, he looked at his calendar and he said, "I'm sorry, I cannot come on that day. It was Shabbos." So they figured, not paying enough, so they offered to pay him double. And he said, "No, absolutely not." They offered him triple, quadruple. And he tried explaining to them that this is not a matter of money, this is Shabbos. So they told him, "We're going to give you a blank check. You can put whatever you want on it. Whatever you want." Right? This is a very important meeting, one of the biggest companies in the world. Right? We could afford it. And she said, "That won't help. A blank check won't help. This has nothing to do with money. No matter how much money you give me, I'm not able to do it." They hung up the phone on him. They're very upset, but they kind of needed him. It was very important for this conference. And they called him back a while later, and they told him that they changed the date of the conference from Shabbos to Sunday. A while later, he was speaking to one of the senior vice presidents at Microsoft, and he was told, this person told him that he had spoken to Bill Gates, who at that time was still the CEO of Microsoft. At that time, he was the richest man in the world. And Bill Gates asked him, "Well, everything was planned, everything was scheduled. Why are they pushing the conference off? Why is this a sudden date change?" And they told him, "We tried to get this Jewish speaker, and he didn't want to come on Shabbat." So Bill Gates is like, "So why didn't you just pay him properly? You could have given him enough money. With money, you could buy anything, right? I'm the richest guy in the world. I know that. With money, you can get anybody to do whatever you want." But he told him, "We tried. We offered him a blank check. He didn't want to come." And Bill Gates stopped for a minute. And he said, I always thought that I was the richest man in the world, that I had everything. I could have whatever I want. But you know what? It seems like there are some things that even I can't buy. Right? Perhaps there's some things there are some people who might have things that I cannot acquire. Right? Somebody might be wealthier than me in a certain way. I don't have Shabbos. So, if you ask the average person in the street, you tell over such a story, they're not even able to relate to such a thing, right? Shabbos is Shabbos, but there's money, right? Money, you can get anything you want, right? That's the way the world works. The world runs on money. For a person to understand that there are things that are more important than that, it takes a different outlook, a different perspective, to realize what's really important and what's really valuable. Rav Motele, Rav Mordechai Tursky, the Rav Mastrifka Rebbe, grandson of the Ma'ori Naim, traveled to Eretz Yisrael in the year 1906, and he took with him on a boat a giant box. Everyone asked him, what's all the luggage that you're taking with you? Right? What do you have? Taking your whole house with you? And when he came to Eretz Yisrael, they realized that he was bringing his sukkah. He had a sukkah, which was a very special sukkah. It had been passed down for many generations. It was a sukkah made out of wood, but on the wood were carved out many interesting designs, interesting shemais, holy names of Hashem. I guess it had been made over many generations, and it was considered very, very holy. When he set up the sukkah in Yerushalayim, Rav Shmuel of Salant, who was still alive at that time, he was very old, he had a hard time walking, he wasn't able to see. He was walking in the street on Sukkot when suddenly he passed by a street and he said, I smell Gan Eden from this direction. Right? Take me there. I want to see what's there. And they brought him to the sukkah. Right? He walked in. He started walking around, feeling the walls of the sukkah. And every year, Hasidim all wanted to take a part in the great honor of helping the Rebbe set up this holy special sukkah. In the year 1915, the Hasidim all came to help the Rebbe set up a sukkah. And to their shock, the sukkah is gone. The ordinary wooden planks are, regular sukkah. But the main sukkah is gone. They asked the Rebbe didn't want to say anything. And nobody knew what happened to the sukkah. A few years, about 5 years passed by. In 1920, I think the Rebbe passed away. And after the Rebbe passed away, at his Shloshim, they had like a ceremony where they spoke about him. And a Jew from somewhere in the north of Eretz Yisrael asked to speak. And he got up and he said, I'm sure many of you are wondering what happened to the Rebbe's sukkah. I'll tell you. I know what happened to the Rebbe's sukkah. 5 years ago, this was during World War I, when times were very, very difficult in Eretz Yisrael, and my son became very sick, and went to the doctors, and the doctor said that he has to bathe in warm water every day for some period of time, whatever it was. But there was a problem. How am I supposed to get warm water? Didn't have faucets that you can, put on warm water and the faucets come on, right? It didn't really work like that. You have to start a fire. You have to make a fire and heat up water. And this was during the war, and it was impossible. It was almost impossible to find even small quantities of wood. To get enough wood to heat up a whole bath was not possible. And he says, I went everywhere. I tried to find wood. My son's life is in danger. Finally, I had no choice. I ran to the Rebbe and I said, Rebbe, what do I do? I need to make a hot bath for my son. And there's no wood. No wood to be found. I think the government even made laws confiscating all the wood at that time for the war efforts. So the Rebbe said, your son's life is in danger and he needs wood. Okay, he ran down to the basement and he came running up with his sukkah. Right? He has 7 boards of wood for his sukkah. I don't know how many boards there were. It was seven boards for the 7 midas. And for the next week, every day, he burnt one of the boards of the sukkah. And when you think about it, we're talking about a holy sukkah with names of Hashem engraved on it, with different holy designs, right? And we might think that the best purpose of such wood is for the Rebbe to sit in the sukkah on sukkahs, but no, that's not the best way to use a sukkah. The best way to use such a sukkah, and the holiest level the sukkah can possibly achieve, is if you take the wood and you burn it to save the life of a Jewish child. Right? The priorities are so much different if you know how to look at things. And it's the way people in the world look at something is very different from the way the Torah looks at something. Our priorities are very, very different. The Gemara in Pesachim, Daf Nun Amud Aleph, tells us that Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, became very sick. And the doctors tried to give him medicine, but nothing worked. His situation deteriorated until the doctors realized that it was over, and they declared him dead. They declared him dead. A few moments later, suddenly he opened his eyes, and it appeared as if he was like waking up and coming from some distant place. And as he regained consciousness, his father said to him, "What happened? Where were you? What did you see?" And he said, "I'm coming from Oilam Hafuch Reisi. I saw an upside down world, a backwards world, a world where everything is turned over. Right? The things that are on top in this world are on the bottom in that world. The things that are on the bottom in this world are on top in that world. People who we think are very important in this world, nothing of it. Right? People who, are the lowest down here are the most elevated and the highest up there." Rabba Bar Chana said the following story, very interesting story. He says that we were once, this is in Bava Basra, in Gimel Amud Beis. He said we were once traveling on a ship, and there was some storm, and the ship was having a hard time sailing, or we were lost, and we noticed a little island in the middle of the water. We figured maybe we could stop and fix things up a little bit, rest. So we pulled over, we get out on this little island, and it's like empty, small little island, it's completely empty. And we wanted to prepare some food, so we got out some wood, and we lit a little fire over there. And as the fire starts to burn, suddenly the whole island starts to move, and the island starts to shake back and forth, and suddenly the island sinks down into the water, and we're left floating in the middle of the ocean. Luckily, we were right near our ship, so we're able to safely get back on board. But as we look up, we see it wasn't an island. It was a whale that was apparently resting, and we confused it with an island. Right? So everybody, it's a very strange Gemara. What does this mean? So the Netziv explains that this is really what our world is today. We look at our world as this permanent place that we're going to be here forever. We have everything worked out. We have a bunch of plans. We have this island that's set up right in the middle of the ocean. We're going to stay here. We have everything set up. We're about to start our fire, but it could disappear in a second. Right? It's a olam hafach, right? If we would see the truth, we would realize that everything is the exact opposite of the way it seems. So last year, just over a year ago, it was during the week of Re'eh last year. So I once, so about a year ago, I walked into the dining room of my house, and I noticed my son, Ari, was standing there in front of me. There's a mirror on the wall over there, and he's standing there like staring into the mirror. And I said, Ari, what are you looking at? And he says, the mirror is backwards. And I tell him, the mirror is, what are you talking about? And he points behind him. The week before, we had celebrated my son Mendy's birthday, right? He said we were away last week. The reason why I wasn't here last week, we were away celebrating Mendy's birthday. And we had hung up a big happy birthday sign. And Ari was now looking in the mirror, and he was trying to read the happy birthday sign. And he noticed that it was backwards. So he said, why does the mirror turn things around? Why are things backwards? Right? Now, of course, there are certain lenses that can, there are certain shapes that can flip things around. If you look in, maybe a spoon or something, sometimes things are flipped. But usually a lens that flips something will flip it in all directions. It will flip it up and down also, as well as right and left. But in the mirror, everything seems right, up and down work, but right and left are for some reason switched around. So Ari wanted to know, why is everything backwards in the mirror? Why does the mirror flip around left and right? I thought about it. I told him it's a good question. And I proceeded to pick up my right hand. And I said to Ari, which hand am I holding up? So he looked at me and he thought for a second. And he said, you're holding up your right hand. And I told him, I'm holding up my right hand, you're right. You obviously figured that out. But which side does my hand appear to be from your perspective when you're looking at it? And he said, it looks to be on the left side. So I asked him why. So he said, because he's standing across from me, and therefore right and left are reversed. Right? So up and down are objective. No matter what position I'm in, we can all agree where up and where down is. At least anywhere on this planet Earth that we find ourselves. Right? Once you go into outer space, it gets a little confusing. But as long as we're down here, all the people in this room can agree which direction is up and which direction is down. But when it comes to right and left, that's very subjective, right? Me and you can disagree which side is right and left, right? This might be my right side and it's your left side. And if I were to go sit in the seat over there and turn around, I would also switch around for me. So I told Ari, when I look at another person, and not just at another person, it's really anything that I look at, but it's easiest to understand it when you're talking about another person. When I look at another person, I am seeing that person backwards. The only way to look at another person is if I stand across from him and face the opposite direction. So when I look at you, I see you backwards. Your left side appears to be on the right, and your right side appears to be on the left. And there's no way for me to see you correctly. The only way for me to see you correctly is if I were to be facing the same direction as you are, which would mean I'd have to be behind you and you would have to be transparent, which doesn't really work for most people, right? So the only way that I can see you in the right direction, which means I'm looking in the same direction as you are and I can see you, is if we're both standing in front of a mirror. So the mirror is not showing things backwards. As a matter of fact, everything else is backwards. When I look at you, I see you backwards. The only time I see you correctly is when I look in the mirror. Because that's how I can see you from your perspective. That's how I can see you the way you really are. So the mirror doesn't turn anything around. The whole world is backwards, I told him. The mirror is the only thing that allows us to see the world in the correct way. Right? And this is really what the Torah is telling us, and what Rashi is telling us. That the Chachamim come along and they tell us the left side is really the right side. And it is. That's how it is. That's how it is in truth. The left side is really the right side. We just see things the other way. Right? And we need to, and why do we see things the other way? Because we're looking at it from the wrong direction. We have a different perspective on what's important, on what matters in life. And we need to look at things from the direction of the Chachamim, from the direction of the Torah. The Torah can teach us how to look at things properly, how to achieve the right perspective. A man once came to the Chazon Ish with a kashrus question. He had a question about a frying pan. It was a fleshige frying pan, and there was a drop of milk that fell in, and he had a whole shaila. And Chazon Ish, good question. The Chazon Ish pulled out a bunch of books, and he starts looking and checking up different sources. And he's sitting there for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Finally, the person who asked the question starts to feel a little guilty, right? He's wasting so much time. The Chazon Ish's time is very important. So he says, it doesn't matter, it's fine, it's a cheap pan, I'll get a new pan, he said to the Chazon Ish. It's not important. So the Chazon Ish ignores him, he continues looking into the question. And he says, Rabbi, I told you, it's not an important question, I'll buy a new frying pan. And the Chazon Ish says, you think I'm worried about a frying pan? He said, I don't care about the frying pan. I'm trying to figure out what's the Rotzein Hashem. I'm trying to figure out what Hashem's will is. What's the halacha? I don't care about the frying pan. I care about Hashem's will. Of course you can buy a new frying pan. I want to figure out what the halacha is. So many of us, when we look at a halacha question, we're trying to figure out what bracha to make on this food. Right? We want to eat food. We want to know if this food is kosher. The reason why we need to know the halacha is because we want the food. And in order to eat the food, we need to know what the halacha is. But from a Torah perspective, the food, the frying pan, whatever else is involved, is worthless. It's the divine will that's important. That's the approach. That's what really matters. And really, that's the only thing that's important in the world, right? The physical world that we're in is a manifestation of Hashem's will, right? Everything in this world represents something on a spiritual level, and we don't see that. We don't realize what everything represents, right? A woman once came, an aguna once came to the Beis Halevi, Rabbi Yisrael Soloveitchik. Her husband had disappeared a while earlier. Nobody knew where he was. They didn't know if he was still alive. If he was alive, they didn't know if he was still religious, if he had any intention of coming home. And obviously she didn't know what to do. There were no witnesses. Nobody knew what happened to him. And she came to the Beis Halevi, and she started crying. And Rabbi Soloveitchik asked her, "Is everything okay? What do you want? What do you need?" And she tells him her story, and she says, I want to know if my husband is still alive. So the Beis Halevi thinks for a few seconds, and he says, yes, he's alive. Wonderful. Is he still religious? Right? Is he still, did he change? Is he still the way he was? So he says, yeah, he's still religious. So she says, is he going to come back home? He says, yeah, sure, he should be home. So he should be home pretty soon. And sure enough, a few days later, the husband comes home. Right? So the Beis Halevi students run over to him, tell him the news, and they tell him, look what a tremendous miracle you did. Right? This is pretty unusual. The Beis Halevi was a big halachic authority, but he wasn't known as a Baal Moifes. He wasn't like a Hasidic Rebbe, was known for his miracles. And they said, wow, you did such an amazing miracle. Ruach HaKodesh. He said, it's not Ruach HaKodesh, it's halacha. They said, what do you mean halacha? So he said, well, halacha. She asked me a question. She asked me a halachic question. She asked me if her husband's alive. Now the halacha is that a person has a cheskas chaim. If a person's alive, and you don't see him for a period of time, you assume that he's still alive. And halachically, you have to act as if they're still alive. Then she asked me a second question. If her husband's still religious. Now the halacha is that a person has a cheskas kashrus. If a person, unless you have two witnesses who saw a person transgressing or doing a sin, you assume that the person is righteous, that the person is a tzaddik. So I told her husband is still religious. So Talmidim, students asked him, but how did you know he's coming home? So he says, well, if he's alive and he's religious, so why wouldn't he come home? Right? It's obvious. Right? And he looked at the whole world as a manifestation of halacha, of Hashem's desire, of the Torah. And we approach Torah from the opposite direction. We think that the world is what's important, and in order to understand the world, we have to know how the Torah tells us to live in this world. But that's mixing up the right and the left side, looking at things backwards. Right? In 2 weeks, we're going to read the Toichach, Parshas Kisava. He speaks about the blessings and the opposite of blessings. Right? The blessings for observing the Torah and the opposite of blessings for people who don't. And it's a little bit scary. But a big portion of Parshas Kisava speaks about things that don't appear to be blessings. And there are many different customs about how to read that section of the Torah. So, amongst the Sephardic communities, many of them treat it almost as a normal Torah portion, right? They read it normally. In some communities, some Sephardic communities, they even call up the rabbi. They honor the rabbi with this Torah portion because they think, part of the rabbi's job is to make sure everybody's behaving, to tell people off when they're not behaving. So they honor the rabbi with this. But amongst Ashkenazic Jews, the custom is very different. People are very scared of the being called up for this Torah portion, right? And over the years, many different customs developed, right? In many communities, they try to call. They don't call anybody important. They call like Ma'aretz, ignoramus, from the most simple, people in the community. In some communities, by Chabad in general, the custom is that the Baal Koira reads it. They don't actually call anybody up. The Baal Koira who's reading the whole parsha reads this as well, but they don't actually call him up for this. They don't want to give him the honor of getting the Toichacha. In other communities, it's the Shamish of the Shul who gets this Torah portion. There are some communities where they don't call anybody up. They just say they don't call anybody up by name. They say whoever wants to come up should come up, and then they kind of wait till somebody reluctantly makes their way up to the Torah. There are other communities that have the custom to pay very well for anybody who wants to accept this aliyah. Right? Nobody wants it, so you got to pay a heavy price for somebody who would want to take this. There are some communities where after they read the Teichacha, they proceed to make a long mishaberach and shower the person with blessings to make up for all of the Teichacha that he just got. Right? And there are even stories stories that are told of places where nobody wanted to take it, and people were just sitting in shul waiting, and nobody went up. Rabbi Nathan's son, the Shalom Eshiv, writes that in his community they were once sitting and nobody went up. So he said that they should just read it without calling anybody up. Nobody would get the aliyah. It's better than disrespecting the Torah and just leaving it open like that. But obviously, everybody has their own customs. But there are people who don't really take this seriously. They say, it's just another portion of the Torah. How could it be? It's Torah. It's holy. Can't be any negativity to it. So, Reb Chaim Kanievsky was once asked about this. And they told him, why do people make such a big deal about this? It's a portion of the Torah. The Torah is holy. It's blessings. Could a portion of the Torah really bring the opposite of blessings? And he said, listen, there are many different customs. And obviously, if you're in a community where the custom is that, the rabbi gets this portion or they honor a person with this portion, then obviously that's the custom, Minhag Yisrael Torah. A Jewish custom is part of Torah, and obviously you're going to be protected. But if you're in a community where the custom is not to get this Torah, not to call somebody up, and you're not careful and you decide to do it anyway, so yes, it's not something you should be doing, and it's a negative thing. It has a negative connotation, this Torah portion. So they said to him, you can say that, but is there any proof for this? Are there any stories of somebody who got this aliyah and something bad happened to them? Right? Every year, communities all over the world read this Torah portion. Have you ever heard of somebody who was harmed by the Teichacha? He says, yeah. Not only it's a story that I heard, I personally know somebody. Okay, let's hear. What's the story? So he said, many years ago, when I was in Koilel, there was a young man who was in Koilel with us. He was a very diligent Torah scholar. He would sit and learn. And he would sit and learn. What time do you want to start?
No.
What? Oh, they're all waiting for me. Okay. So there was a young man. He was a Torah scholar. He would sit and learn all day. And one year in Shul, there was a problem. There was nobody wanted to go up for the aliyah of the Teichacha. Right? They tried to pay somebody, but apparently nobody wanted to. I guess they didn't offer enough money, maybe, or maybe they did, and nobody wanted to take it anyways. And Reb Chaim says this young man said, if nobody wants to take it, I'll do it. So they told him it's dangerous. He said it's a portion of the Torah. I'm going to go up and get an aliyah. So he went up and he got an aliyah. And that week, continued Reb Chaim, tragedy struck. Something terrible happened. Want to hear the terrible thing that happened to him? That week, he was notified that a distant uncle in America passed away and left him a $3 million business. Now, in those days, there was no way to manage business in America from Eretz Yisrael. So Nebuch, he had to leave the Koilel and he had to travel to America to run the business. And his plans were that he would go, he would try to shut things down, sell it off, and come right back to learn. But Nebuch said, Reb Chaim, he never made it back. Right? He still, he got distracted and he never came back to learning. Right? What a terrible thing from the Teichacha. Now, last time I said the story, it was near Parshas Kisaveh, and that week it was like a long line of people. Everybody wanted to get the Teichacha. Because for many people, if you tell over the story, they're like, it's a big blessing. Right? But if you know how to look at things, if you know the right perspective, how to look at the world, how the way the Torah looks at the world, the way Reb Chaim looks at the world, the way our Chachamim look at this world, what we think is the right side is really the left side. And what we think is the left side is really the right side because we're looking at it from the wrong perspective. And this is really what the Torah is telling us. This is what Rashi is telling us over here. That when the Chachamim tell you that the right side is the left side and the left side of the right is the right side, you have to realize that what we see is an upside-down world. And we see things from the wrong perspective. We have to try to connect to our Chachamim and learn from them how to look at things in the right way and how to see what's really on the right, what's really on the left, what's really up, and what's really down. L'chaim, we should all adopt the right perspective and look at the world in the right way. L'chaim.